Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Manager said, you start at 7, finish at 7, so I left at 7, exactly. I used to work at a car company about 2 or 3 years ago as a telephonist on the night shift doing 12-hour shifts. The job was pretty good, 4 days working, 3 days off, and the pay was decent. However, most of my coworkers didn't take their job seriously. They'd call in sick frequently or simply not show up for work at all, which created real problems, especially on nights when only 4 of us were scheduled. Even one person not showing up could be deeply felt. I was considered a star employee. I always showed up early, logged in, and started working usually around 6:30, well before my shift started at 7. I never took sick days, rearranged my holidays to accommodate the company's needs, and worked overtime whenever necessary. I was so dedicated that there were several instances when I worked 18 to 24 hours straight, covering for colleagues who didn't show up. It was my first real job, and I genuinely believed in the company. I relied on the train to commute to and from work, carefully planning my routes to avoid lateness. However, on one particular day, the trains were running a reduced service due to breakdowns. Many trains had been poorly repaired with substandard parts, causing the wheels to stick to the tracks when braking, creating uneven wear. Consequently, many trains were out of commission. To make matters worse, my train got delayed for an additional 15 to 20 minutes due to a signal issue. This delay resulted in me arriving about 10 minutes late for my shift. Before I even had a chance to sit down, my manager started giving me grief. Apparently, my lateness had delayed another telephonist from going home, forcing them to stay an extra 10 minutes. 2 other colleagues had already called in sick, so we were severely short-staffed. I absolutely hate being late, so I was already irritated, but having my manager confront me immediately only intensified my frustration. My response to him was straightforward. Apologies, I was late. However, how many times have I ever been late before? I come in 30 minutes early every day, and I've stayed late multiple times to help out. Today, the train had issues beyond my control, and I was stuck underground with no signal to notify you. My manager, completely dismissing my explanation, replied coldly, you start at 7, you finish at 7. Coming in early is on your own time, and whenever you've stayed late, you've been paid for it. No one asked you to do it. Okay then, was my only reply. The next day turned out to be incredibly busy. My colleague had left and only one person from the morning shift arrived to take over. As he sat down, I promptly began packing up. At exactly 7 a.m., I stood up to leave. Because I'd usually stay to help when this happened, everyone seemed surprised and asked where I was going. My response was simple and direct. I start at 7, I finish at 7. This happened to be my final shift before a few days off. When I returned to work, I was immediately called into a meeting with my manager and HR. They asked why I left a single telephonist alone on an exceptionally busy morning. Without hesitation, I looked directly at my manager and repeated exactly what he had previously said to me. My manager informed me I start at 7, I finish at 7. The look on the HR representative's face was priceless. She was clearly furious. Realizing she now had another significant staffing issue because one of her most reliable employees had been unfairly reprimanded by a manager. She told me to return to my desk as she needed to speak privately with the manager. About 20 minutes later, my manager returned looking completely defeated. After that incident, he never said another word to me about being late. Manager deserved to get in trouble for that. That's how they ruin good employees. It isn't fair that the bad employees always get away with everything, but the one time the reliable person does something, they get in trouble. And our second story. Guy mistakes me for a bookstore employee, embarrasses himself beautifully. I just really love witnessing a stupid guest realizing just how stupid they are, and I needed to share it somewhere where people will understand. I was sitting in a local used bookstore, my personal heaven, just surrounded by mountains of books. They have seats in each aisle so you can literally just relax and browse, and I was in one, quietly minding my own business. I realized I had a stack of books in my arms that I was going to buy. I was reading another book that I'd grabbed from a shelf, and this guy rounds the corner and he goes, "Do you still keep the big books out front?" I didn't think he was talking to me, an obviously ununiformed, unnamed tag girl browsing the books and reading, so I didn't respond. Again, he says the same thing, a little more forced. At this point, I look up and realize he's looking right at me. I could have been rude, I could have been polite, but instead I just opted to just shrug and say, I really don't know. And he scoffs at me. I fully expect him to chastise me for being a bad bookstore employee or whatever, but he doesn't. He scoffs, rolls his eyes, and stomps away and mumbles to himself, whatever. But then I hear him start telling the sweet old lady at the front, the real employee at this bookshop, that the other employee sucks. She doesn't even know the layout of the store. All I asked was where the big books are. Are they still at the front? And she sounds confused about his rant, but tells him, yes, about the books. And at that time, I decide it's time for me to check out, and I bring up my books. I greet her, she greets me, asks me if I found everything okay today, and I see him turn around and look at us, and his face, oh, I love that face, it just falls. He looked so embarrassed. The lady at the desk told me it was nice seeing me today, etc., all good customer service stuff, and I just had to say something slightly passive-aggressive. I said, oh yeah, I love how peaceful it is here. You can normally just sit in the aisles and not be bothered by anyone for hours. The guy turned away. I walked right past him as I left with an extra, have a good day, to the sweet old lady, and I could see his face was beet red with embarrassment for mistaking me for an employee and then getting angry. I just love when the sweet revenge of sticking it to them happens. It's not often you see guests really realize how idiotic they can act. Oh, this one is absolute gold. Nothing sweeter than seeing that look of pure realization hit someone's face after they've just made a complete fool of themselves. And our last story. Neighbor tried to enforce her imaginary HOA, so I painted my house bright yellow. The day I moved into my new home, which was previously a neglected foreclosure, I knew I might have some cleaning up to do. But I had no idea that my most significant challenge would be the neighbors. Before I'd even unpacked a single box, there was a loud knock at my door. I opened it to find a grouchy-looking older man standing with arms folded, scowling. Your backyard slopes into mine, he grumbled without so much as a hello. Every time it rains, I get water where I don't want it. You need to fix that immediately. Hi, I'm your new neighbor, I introduced myself pointedly. Nice to meet you too. Look, I don't care who you are, he barked, waving me off dismissively. Just handle the slope. Before I could respond, a shrill voice joined the conversation from the sidewalk. And make sure you control your yard clippings, shouted a woman I would soon come to know as his even grouchier wife, Karen. I watched incredulously as she picked up individual blades of grass from her perfectly manicured lawn, tossing them one by one back into my yard. We maintain a certain standard around here, you know. Okay, I sighed, feeling exasperation already sinking in. I'll make sure to mention it to the landscaper. Speaking of the landscaper, later that day I found Karen practically screaming at the poor man, berating him loudly in front of the entire neighborhood for a few stray clippings that had dared drift over the property line. Lady, it's grass, the landscaper explained patiently, clearly trying to maintain his composure. You're not allowed to disrespect my property, Karen shrieked, her face red with indignation. I should know, I'm the HOA president. HOA, I asked, stepping forward. I wasn't aware we had one here. Well, it's unofficial, but I uphold the neighborhood standards, Karen sniffed, proudly straightening up. Ah, a self-proclaimed HOA president. Wonderful. Over the next few weeks, I had a parade of contractors, painters, and repairmen coming in to restore the neglected house. Every single tradesman had the misfortune of encountering Karen. She would march right up to their trucks, knocking aggressive on their windows, demanding they not park in front of her house. Excuse me, she'd say, hands planted on her hips. You cannot park your vehicle here. It disrupts the ambiance of my property. Most tradesmen shrugged it off, but a few even packed up and left, refusing to return without assurance that Karen would stay inside her house. Then came my decision to install a net batting cage in the backyard. Baseball was a passion of mine, and without a real HOA, I knew I was free to set it up. Within hours of the batting cage going up, Karen was knocking furiously on my door, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "That thing is hideous," she screeched. "It ruins the view from my patio. You must take it down immediately." "Karen," I said calmly, leaning against the door frame, "there's no HOA here, official or otherwise. I'm within my rights." "We'll see about that," she fumed, storming away with threats of legal action echoing in her wake. A few days later, I received an official-looking letter in my mailbox. Inside, printed on impressive stationery, was a notice claiming that I was violating neighborhood aesthetics and must remove the batting cage within 7 days or face fines and legal consequences. At the bottom was Karen's signature, prominently marked as president of the unofficial HOA. Amused and slightly irritated, I took it upon myself to respond formally. I wrote a polite yet firmly worded letter informing Karen that her self-proclaimed title held no legal standing, that I had done my due diligence checking the neighborhood regulations, and that the batting cage would remain. In retaliation, or perhaps sheer spite, I decided to repaint my house bright, unapologetic yellow. Karen was apoplectic, of course. She stormed across the yard, shaking the freshly painted fence. "You cannot paint your house this garish color," she screamed, her voice reaching new octaves. "Oh, but I can, Karen," I replied cheerfully, holding up my paint-stained hands. "Again, no official HOA here. My property, my rules." Defeated yet defiant, Karen stomped back to her house, swearing loudly that this wasn't over. Yet weeks passed, and aside from occasional glares and snide remarks whispered loudly enough for me to hear, the harassment eventually quieted down. In time, other neighbors introduced themselves, expressing gratitude that someone had finally stood up to Karen and her imaginary HOA regime. Turns out Karen's reign as self-appointed HOA president was infamous, but no one had previously had the energy or perhaps the stubbornness to challenge her until I moved in. My backyard slope was never fixed to Karen's liking, the grass still occasionally drifted into her yard, and my batting cage stayed firmly in place, a monument to neighborly independence. As for Karen, her power diminished, her credibility shattered. Occasionally I'd see her pacing her backyard, glancing resentfully at my vibrant yellow house and batting cage, knowing there was nothing she could do about it. And honestly, that alone was worth every moment of trouble. What's going on in the heads of people like Karen? It's just awful. Living life in a fictional world where you're the head of a homeowners association and you decide things? No, Karen, you just have a lot of free time and nothing to do. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.